Picture this: a narrow mountain pass, a sea of soldiers on one side, and just a small group of brave warriors on the other. These warriors know they are walking into certain death, yet they stand firm. Among them is a king, Leonidas of Sparta, leading 300 of his best men against an army so large it seems endless.
It's a story of courage, strategy, and sacrifice. The Battle of Thermopylae wasn't just a fight. It was a moment that showed the power of standing together, even against impossible odds. How did this small group hold off the Persian army for days? And why would anyone choose to stay and fight, knowing they couldn't win?
Today, we'll uncover the incredible story of the 300 Spartans and their allies. It's a tale of loyalty, clever tactics, and a betrayal that changed everything. Stay with us as we dive into one of the greatest last stands in history.
To understand the Battle of Thermopylae, we need to know what was happening in Greece and Persia before it all began. Persia, under King Xerxes, was the largest empire of its time. They had already tried to conquer Greece once before, but the Greeks, led by Athens, stopped them at the Battle of Marathon. That was 10 years earlier, in 490 BC.
Right, and Xerxes wanted revenge. He didn't just want to punish Athens, he wanted to take over all of Greece. This time, he didn't send a small force. He gathered an enormous army and navy. Some say it was the largest army the world had ever seen at that point. Xerxes was determined to succeed where his father, King Darius, had failed.
Meanwhile, the Greek city-states knew they had to work together if they had any chance of stopping him. This wasn't easy because the Greek cities often fought each other, but Athens and Sparta took the lead in building an alliance. They decided to block the Persian advance at a narrow pass called Thermopylae.
Thermopylae was the perfect spot for a small army to face a much larger one. It was a narrow path between mountains and the sea. The Persians couldn't send all their soldiers through at once, which meant the Greeks had a chance to hold them off.
And that's when King Leonidas of Sparta stepped in. He led 300 of his best warriors, but they weren't alone. Other Greek city-states sent their own soldiers. Together, about 7,000 men marched to Thermopylae.
They knew the risks. They knew the size of Xerxes' army. But they also knew that if they didn't stop the Persians there, the entire Greek world could fall. It wasn't just a battle. It was a fight for their way of life.
While the Greek army marched to Thermopylae, Xerxes and his massive forces were already on the move. His army was so large that ancient writers described it as stretching for miles. Of course, those numbers were probably exaggerated, but modern historians still think it was one of the biggest armies in history, with hundreds of thousands of soldiers.
That's right. And imagine the challenge of moving such a huge group. They had to cross rivers, mountains, and even the sea. To make things easier, Xerxes ordered his men to build a bridge of boats across the Hellespont, a narrow strip of water between Asia and Europe. It was an incredible achievement for the time.
It's amazing to think about, isn't it? But Xerxes didn't stop there. He also had a canal dug through a part of land near Mount Athos so that his ships wouldn't have to sail around it. That area was known for dangerous storms, so Xerxes wanted to make sure his fleet would be safe.
Meanwhile, the Greek leaders were planning their defense. They decided to send their navy to block the Persian ships at a place called Artemisium. At the same time, Leonidas and his troops would hold the Persian army at Thermopylae. If both plans worked, they could stop Xerxes from moving deeper into Greece.
But the Greeks knew they were outnumbered. The Persian army wasn't just big. It was made up of soldiers from all over the empire. Xerxes had archers, cavalry, and the famous immortals, his elite warriors. On top of that, his navy was powerful, with ships from places as far as Egypt and Phoenicia.
Still, the Greeks had an advantage. They knew the land. Thermopylae was narrow and surrounded by mountains. It was the perfect place to force the Persians into a fight, where their numbers wouldn't matter as much.
And so, the stage was set. Xerxes' army moved closer, and Leonidas prepared his men for what would become one of history's most famous battles.
When Xerxes and his army arrived at Thermopylae, they expected an easy victory. After all, they outnumbered the Greeks by a huge amount. Xerxes even sent a messenger to Leonidas, offering the Greeks a chance to surrender. He said they could keep their freedom and even get better land if they laid down their weapons.
But Leonidas had no intention of surrendering. His answer was simple: come and take them. That response showed how determined the Greeks were to fight, no matter the odds. Xerxes was shocked. He waited for 4 days, hoping the Greeks would give up and leave. But they didn't.
Finally, on the 5th day, Xerxes ordered his army to attack. Thousands of Persian soldiers marched into the narrow pass, expecting to crush the Greeks. But they were in for a surprise. The Greek soldiers, especially the Spartans, were highly trained and well prepared for this kind of fight.
That's right. The Spartans fought in a formation called a phalanx. They stood close together, with their large shields overlapping to create a wall of defense. Their long spears reached out, keeping the Persian soldiers at a distance. The narrow pass made it impossible for the Persians to surround them or use their cavalry.
The Persians attacked wave after wave, but they couldn't break through. The Greeks even used clever tricks, like pretending to retreat. When the Persians chased after them, the Greeks turned and attacked, catching them off guard. By the end of the first day, thousands of Persian soldiers were dead, while the Greek losses were small.
On the second day, Xerxes sent his best troops, the Immortals, into the fight. These were his elite warriors, known for their skill and discipline. But even they couldn't defeat the Greeks. The narrow pass and the Greek phalanx were just too strong.
As the second day ended, Xerxes grew angry and worried. How could his massive army be stopped by such a small force? He needed a new plan to get past the Greeks, and that's when a local man, Ephialtes, came to him with a terrible offer, one that would change everything.
Ephialtes, a man from the area, knew a secret path through the mountains. This path went around the Greek position and could allow the Persians to attack from behind. He told Xerxes about it, hoping for a reward. For the Greeks, this betrayal would mean disaster.
That night, Xerxes sent his best troops to follow Ephialtes and take the mountain path. The Greek soldiers guarding the path, a group of Phocians, were caught off guard. They tried to stop the Persians, but were overwhelmed. The enemy moved quickly and surrounded the Greeks at Thermopylae.
When Leonidas learned of the betrayal, he knew the end was near. He called a council and told the other Greek leaders they could leave to save their forces. Many of them did retreat, but Leonidas and his 300 Spartans stayed. They were joined by 700 Thespians who chose to fight to the death, and a small group of Thebans.
Leonidas and his men knew they wouldn't survive, but they stayed to give the rest of the Greek army time to prepare for future battles. Their bravery would become a symbol of sacrifice and loyalty. They moved to a more open part of the pass, ready to fight to the last.
The final battle was fierce. The Greeks fought with everything they had, using swords, broken spears, and even their hands when their weapons failed. They killed many Persians, but the enemy's numbers were too great. Leonidas himself fell during the fight, and the Spartans fought to protect his body.
By the end, all the remaining Greeks were killed, except for a few Thebans who surrendered. Xerxes ordered his men to find and bury Leonidas' body, as he saw him as a worthy enemy. The Persians had won the battle, but the cost was high. Thousands of their soldiers lay dead.
The sacrifice of Leonidas and his men didn't stop the Persian army, but it inspired the Greeks. News of their bravery spread quickly, giving the Greek people hope and determination. The stage was set for the next great battle in this war for freedom.
After the battle at Thermopylae, the Persian army continued its march through Greece. With the pass open, Xerxes and his soldiers captured several cities, including Athens. The Athenians had already evacuated, but their city was burned by the Persians. It was a dark time for Greece.
But even with this loss, the Greeks didn't give up. The naval battle at Artemisium had ended in a draw, and the Greek fleet had retreated to regroup. They now prepared for a major fight at Salamis. Themistocles, the Athenian leader, planned to use the narrow straits near the island of Salamis to trap the Persian navy.
Thermopylae also had another effect. It inspired the Greek forces to stand together. Leonidas and his 300 Spartans had shown the power of bravery and unity. Their sacrifice became a rallying cry for the Greeks. People were reminded that even against a much larger enemy, they could fight back if they stood as one.
The Persians paid a high price for their victory at Thermopylae. Thousands of their soldiers had died, and Xerxes was beginning to realize that this war wouldn't be as easy as he thought. Even though his army was large, it was hard to keep them fed and supplied as they moved through Greece.
The Greek fleet finally defeated the Persian navy at the Battle of Salamis, forcing Xerxes to retreat with most of his army. A year later, at the Battle of Plataea, the Greek army defeated the remaining Persian forces, ending the invasion.
Thermopylae might have been a loss for the Greeks, but it became one of the most famous battles in history. It showed how courage, smart strategy, and teamwork could make a difference, even when the odds were against you. The legacy of Thermopylae still lives on, from books and movies to lessons in leadership and strategy. It's a story that teaches us about the value of standing together and never giving up.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this story, let us know whose life or battle you'd like us to cover next.
And don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you next time for another incredible story.